Joseph DioGuardi, certified public accountant and former member of Congress. Your new book is Unaccountable Congress, It Doesn't Add Up. Why'd you write this book?
Good time for it, don't you think? But I started writing it 3 years ago, and thank God, with a little luck, it came out at a time when I think the public's eyes are focused on this issue. I wrote the book because this was the message that I took to Congress with me in 1985. I was kind of surprised when I got there, Lou, to find out that I was the only practicing certified public accountant ever elected in over 200 years. And I did go there because I felt that the process needed someone to kind of refine it. And one of the things that I did in Congress was to propose a bill that was passed after I left Congress, calling for a chief financial officer of the United States of America. George Bush signed that legislation in 1990. The reason for the book is that after I left Congress, it dawned on me that if I was going to leave any legacy for the 4 years that I was there, it should be a report to the people of the United States of America as to what I saw as a professional CPA, having been trained for 22 years with one of the world's largest accounting firms, to see certain things that the average person, and certainly the average congressman, didn't see and still doesn't see. That we have a system, a budget process, we have a system of accounting, a system of keeping books that is not the system that government imposes on you. In fact, it's the worst system that can be used. And in the book, I make the comparison between the bankruptcy of New York City in 1975 and the theoretical bankruptcy of the United States of America sometime in the future, making the case that the new bankers for the United States of America are not those banks who were buying the municipal bonds of New York City back in '75, but Japan, Germany, Great Britain, who are buying tens of billions of dollars worth of treasury bills and treasury bonds. So we're kind of hooked on foreign capital. The point is that today, and let me give you the bottom line, the United States is using a Mickey Mouse accounting system. It's called the cash basis. They use it for the budgeting. They use it for the accounting. They use it for everything. It's a system designed for politicians because you can accelerate income, you can defer expenses, and just to give you one example, when we had Graham-Rudman Hollings-Mack, they deferred 1 week of the military payroll in order to meet the targets. I dare say that if officers of a public corporation used the accounting principles and the accounting systems that the United States uses today, they would be indicted for securities fraud through the Securities and Exchange Commission, and no doubt would be incarcerated. Give you another example. We don't have a capital budget in the United States of America, and yet we spend recently $200 billion, that's with a B, $billion on equipment. $100 billion in the military, $100 billion on procurement in other agencies. And yet, we in effect write that off the day that we buy it, it becomes part of the deficit. So we've developed a mentality in Congress, especially among the bureaucrats, that there's no accountability for this. It's been written off. So maybe sometime soon we should sell it in order to look good at the end of the year. And by the way, if we haven't used it all, maybe we have to get rid of it because they won't give us the amount of budget allocation next year if we still have some left over. So we've conditioned everybody to spend in government. And you can see what's happening. The deficits keep going up and up. When I was there in Congress, at least we had an imperfect solution. It was called Graham-Rudman. It said that, and it started in 1986, that if we take the deficit and we reduce it 25% a year, by 1990, there would be no more deficit. Well, guess what they did? After 2 years, they said, well, we're not going to meet the targets. Let's stretch it out several more years, which they did. And then they ditched the whole thing in 1990. So what that tells us, it should tell the listening audience, is that there's absolutely no discipline in Congress when it comes to accountability, when it comes to fiscal responsibility, when it comes to counting your money, the tax dollars that you send in, because there's this mentality that if we run out of money, we can somehow come up with a gimmick, and I go through about a dozen gimmicks in Chapter 2 called Plastic Budgeting. And if we can't come up with a gimmick, we always have this cash basis of accounting to fall back on. We can accelerate income, defer expenses. If that doesn't work, hey, we can sell some bonds. Because we have in government, and that's why I put this on the cover of the book. You can see it. Your hands are covering it right now, Lou. You see that congressional credit card? That's, in effect, a mock-up of a congressman's voting card. And many people don't realize, let me get you the real culprit right here, because I've waved this around in many speeches around America. Many Americans don't realize that Congress votes with a plastic card. There is a computer terminal at the end of a row of seats, and you put this card in, you got 15 minutes. If you press yes, a green light goes up by your name. If you press no, a red light goes up by your name. If it's a quorum call, it's an orange light. My friends, take a good hard look at this card. This is the card you gave your congressman or congresswoman. It's the most expensive credit card in the world because it doesn't have a limit. Your credit card has a limit. When you get a call from American Express, Diners Master Charge, and you've reached your $2,000 limit or your $5,000 limit, you know that economic reality has arrived. You might sit down with your family. You probably would. You'll look at your standard of living. You might even defer a vacation, not with this card. You know what they do with it? They just keep raising the limit. It's called the debt ceiling. And last year, they raised it to $4.1 trillion. That's with a T, trillion dollars. We're already, our national debt, I believe, has just exceeded $3.5 trillion. They've already given themselves the credit limit to go another $500 million. So if they can't account for it in a gimmick way, and they can't raise the taxes, which they don't have the nerve to do, they will then float some bonds, pass it on to the next generation. That's why we have a credit card mentality, and that's why in the book I say on the credit card that's congressional, look at the credit line, unlimited. Look at the expiration date, never. Look at bill to future generations. This is the ungodly, unholy burden we're putting on the next generation. And Lou, just to finalize my opening comments, if you can't do all of that to disguise economic reality, you know what they'll then do? Put it off budget. And they've done that with the S&L crisis. Only half of it is on the books. Can you imagine you, as a businessman, only putting half your expenditures on the books? And the last thing they'll do, if that doesn't work, is a guarantee. You know why? We don't record the cost of guarantees today because we don't record liabilities. All we record on the books is the flow of cash. It's a Mickey Mouse accounting system that I said before we took New York City off of in 1975. That was the price for the bailout. So you've got a whole string of these gimmicks. If none of them work, we'll guarantee it, and let's worry about the default later, and that's exactly what happened to the S&L crisis. So why did I pick the name Unaccountable Congress? Because what I see in Congress is a lot of people who know how to spend, very few know how to count. Maybe it's time to have a few more certified public accountants elected to Congress, and if not CPAs, business people, so we can get back to the fiscal principles, at least the ones that government imposes on you and your businesses through the Securities and Exchange Commission. The double standards are unbelievable. That's why Chapter 6 about the House of Representatives I've entitled A House of Ill Repute, Do As I Say, Not As I Do, and I go through 14 major pieces of legislation that they've imposed on you, but they've exempted themselves from.
Our guest is Joseph DioGuardi. He's the author of Unaccountable Congress, and our first call is from Detroit. Good evening.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good.
This gentleman here is fantastic. They need to put him on all the channels here in Detroit, 247, and probably a few other channels across the United States of America, because I think he can enlighten a lot of people. What I wanted to find out, you know, we have a lot of money that we spend toward defense and the millions and billions of dollars that goes that way. But when it comes to domestic programs, all of a sudden in Congress is such a big fight for $2 billion. But then we can talk about the B-2 bomber and it's $75 billion. It seems like it's no problem to get that money. You know, how can, you know, what is the problem there with this? You know, why is it such a complication?
It's a very good question. When I was a congressman, I was characterized as a fiscal conservative, and I was strong on defense. But I always voted to freeze the military budget, even though I voted for programs such as the Strategic Defense Initiative and the Midget-Man missiles. I felt that I was making qualitative judgments, but that no matter what the combination was of the defense systems, that we should not exceed last year's budget. You know why? Because I witnessed firsthand on the Government Operations Committee, which was my committee, the waste and the ineffective systems, military weapon systems that were being used. There was one gun that we finally found out after we spent $1 billion was not hitting the target, and they had to get rid of it. It's a shame that we had to spend $1 billion before we found that. And you can imagine how many other weapon systems are not operating the way the military says they are. Now, do we need a strong defense? Certainly. Do we need a spendthrift defense? No. And especially now that the threat of the evil empire is gone, it seems to me that this is the opportunity for the Secretary of Defense, and he's a good man. He served with me for 4 years, Secretary Dick Cheney, and I know he has this in mind, to ratchet down the military budget. You can't do it overnight. There's no question that this $300 billion budget cannot be changed too fast. It seems to me, though, that you need a 5-year plan, and if I had to take a guess, based on what I saw, in 5 years, you should be able to bring this budget down to about 2/3, $200 billion. Now, you know, I wouldn't be able to tell you the mix right now, but it just seems to me that with the Cold War being over, that we should be heading over a period of time to a military budget that's about half the $300 billion we spent. And I would say in 5 years, we should be able to reduce it by $100 billion. Now, why do I say we shouldn't do it too fast? Because it's a human issue, too. There are many people that have to get new jobs, and we don't want to see a drastic human dislocation in the process. But you know something? Your question's good. America now needs a good surgeon, a good fiscal surgeon with a scalpel that will be able to find savings in various controllable programs, because many programs are not controllable, like the interest on the national debt. If you don't pay it, you're in default. But if we started paying down the national debt, or at least reduce those deficits, you wouldn't see the interest bill going up. And let me give you a number that'll shock you. You know what we paid in interest last year on the national debt? $200 billion. That's with a B. And you know, not $1 of that went to roads, jobs, social welfare. You know who got it? A lot of it? Japan, Germany, Great Britain. You know what Japan did with it? Recycled it, bought Rockefeller Center. Now, how long are we going to wait until we decapitalize the greatest society, the greatest democratic system that was ever wrought on Earth? We're only a couple of 100 years old. It seems to me we've got to get back to basics and to the values which say that we've got to save more, we've got to use qualitative as well as quantitative judgments in doing our budgeting. You know, what's this nonsense? If you spent it last year, that means you're entitled to it this year plus 5%. Why don't we justify every dollar that's being spent? Maybe we can't do it every year, so let's go on a 2-year budget system. I call for that in the book, biennial budgeting. But your question's good. I would say that we should be able to find savings in the military, and soon, in over 5 years, I would be disappointed if we didn't find $100 billion to start spending on other domestic programs, or at least eliminate the deficit.
Washington, D.C., good evening. When you're doing live television, you take those chances. Caller, where are you calling from?
It's Palm Desert.
Go right ahead.
Be lower the TV. I was watching a program this weekend where Senator Rudman stated that the deficit could go to $5 trillion, and that if we don't do something soon, we're probably heading for economic collapse within 2 or 3 years. Do you agree with that statement?
I do. I could not quantify it as he did. The $5 trillion you referred to, sir, is the national debt. The deficit this year is projected to be just in excess of $300 billion, but that does not count all of the S&L bailout. They're playing the Mickey Mouse fudging the numbers game with the budget because they don't want to tell you all the bad news. And by the way, I started a foundation when I left Congress called Truth in Government. What did I mean by that? Really truth in government spending, because we really don't know the true cost of the federal government today because of the Mickey Mouse accounting systems, the budgets that use all kinds of gimmicks. But the point is, yes, we are heading to a $5 trillion national debt. We're almost at $4 trillion right now. Can you imagine the interest on $5 trillion, especially if the interest rates go back up to where they were? So I would tell you that Senator Rudman is sounding the alarm. He and I are like the Paul Revere's, not sounding the alarm that the English are coming, but that fiscal disaster can come if we don't begin to measure properly the true cost of doing business here in Washington, and we don't begin to save and also get these deficits under control.
When you were in Congress and coming as a CPA and having that insight and you started pointing these things out, your observations to your colleagues, what response did you get?
Many times they would be kind of frustrated with my questions. In fact, I never forget it. At one meeting, a senior member turned to me after I was trying to give them a little analysis on what they were talking about when they were trying to reduce the deficit, and I got into the problems of the accounting, and one of the members got a little abrupt with me, and he said, you know, Joe, you're not an accountant anymore. You're here in Congress, and he said, maybe you should now trade in those green eye shades of yours. And I quickly turned to him, and I got this quick retort, and I told him, sir, with all due respect, I'm not going to change my green eye shades in for your blinders. And that's what they have in Congress today, blinders. They don't want to know the real cost of doing business, the real cost of government. You know why? They're afraid to tell you. They want you to understand that it's not as bad as it really is, because election happens every 2 years, and they figure they can pass it on to someone else's watch. Well, that's not good enough anymore for America. It's certainly not fair to the next generation, and I'm here because I was proud to be a congressman, proud to represent the 20th Congressional District, and I may do so again, and I want to be sure that I give the message to the public that you don't have to have a title to do good. You can leave Congress, and I hope many of the congressmen, like Senator Rubman, a great senator, who leave, decide to continue their crusade for fiscal responsibility as private citizens by getting involved in foundations and other vehicles.
New York City, good evening.
Yes, sir. I was wondering if you'd be in favor of a constitutional amendment that would allow the people to vote on issues instead of just representatives. It seems like we don't really have a say-so in our government. We can only vote on representatives, and those representatives don't always do what we feel that we want them to.
Well, you raise a mega question that was also raised by Mr. Nesbitt in his book Megatrends, where he said that one of the 10 megatrends he sees is that we're going from representative government to participatory government. And I kind of like that, because I didn't see myself as strictly your representative. I saw myself more like a bridge that was bringing you as the citizen to Washington with me to participate in government. Because, you know, we the people. Government is the people. We are the government. The government is not above the people, but yet people are so jaded today, and they're so dismayed by what they see, that even in presidential elections, only half of them vote, and that's got to change. But what you're referring to is initiative and referenda, and I believe that we should have more of that in New York State. We may have to change the New York State Constitution and push Mario Cuomo a bit, and Lord knows he needs a lot of pushing these days, because New York State now ranks at the bottom of the barrel. We are number 50 in bond ratings in the United States of America. New York State just passed Louisiana. And that's a shame when you consider that in 1975, the books of the city and of the state were put on the best system possible, and we came back, but somewhere in the 80s we lost it again, and now the cost of doing business in New York State is going to be high, because our interest rate's going to go up on our borrowings because of those bad ratings. But I would tell you, sir, that it's a very good thing to look towards, and I hope to see more citizen movements to create constitutional amendments to have more referenda so that the people can speak on issues, not just on electing public officials.
Gaithersburg, Maryland, good evening.
Good evening. I wanted to ask the former congressman, it seems to me, you know, we have almost 500 Congress people, and everybody's representing their own district and supposedly representing the interests of his or her respective district. How is it going to be possible to get all these people to agree or to some consensus on where to allocate the money or what programs to cut? Or, I mean, you know, somebody in one state is not going to, you know, cut his constituents' throats or something and say, let's cut this program. You know, I can't see how they're going to come to some kind of a consensus on these things. Maybe you could help me out with that. Thanks.
Well, you know, you raise a very good point. And I saw my role, and by the way, there's 435 House members and 100 senators, so there's really 535. But in the House, I saw my role not only as a representative for my district of about 510,000 people. Those districts will now be, after the new census, 580,000 people. But I saw my responsibility to the country because many of the votes that I cast were not votes that were strictly representative votes for my district, but were important votes for America. Many of the budget votes. In fact, over 50% of the votes in Congress were budget votes, and I took those very seriously. As a fiscal conservative, I tried to do my best to reduce the cost of government, not with an axe, not cutting across the board, but by making qualitative judgments. This is a problem. It's certainly a big problem today when there's so little comity in the House of Representatives and you see all the fighting that's going on to change the process. I would tell you that the real power in America, my friend, is still the people of the United States of America, but they have to use that power. If they don't use that power in the voting booths, what happens? You create a vacuum. And you know who fills that vacuum? Bureaucrats who keep you online, who want you to fill out more forms, who want more regulations so they can preserve their jobs, so they can write memos to justify their existence. And if you don't fill that vacuum, there'll be some group of congressmen that will decide what to do with your money, and that's what's happening right now. So we've got to find more ways for the citizenry to get more involved in this great government, going back to what the Founding Fathers intended as we the people. Government by the people, for the people, and of the people. It's not we the government, it was we the people, and government is not above the people. We got to get there. In terms of how you make this consensus and allocation, it's very difficult. That's where the political process has to work. But if you feel your representative is not doing that job or is using this card irresponsibly, whether he be or she be a Democrat or Republican, what you ought to do is do what I say in Chapter 8, where I call the citizens to action. The name of that chapter is Cutting the Card. How do you cut this card? When you go into the voting booth, pull the lever, and get rid of the rascal who's not using it responsibly, and then you'll see how they begin to allocate things right.
San Bernardino, California. Good evening.
Hi. Yeah, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. I owe some back taxes, and they put a penalty on me. And then I watched the 2020 show, and they talked about all of the foreign companies here in America that don't pay any taxes at all, and the federal and the IRS won't check into it. And I just wondered what Congress, what they talked about, or what you heard, why they haven't checked into. There's billions of dollars that aren't get paid in taxes, and this one company apparently they fined them $100 million, something like that, but they didn't even put a penalty on it. But me, I owe them $1,000, and they put a penalty on me, and it's been going on for 20, 30 years, I'm sure.
Well, again, you know, when you talk about the problems of the IRS, that's going to be book 2. I decided to concentrate on the legislative branch of government, but I had a chapter written on the military, one on HUD and one on the IRS, that I pulled to put in another book so that we can focus on one part of government at a time. But you raise, again, an interesting point. I think, though, and I have some knowledge of this because I served as a tax partner for 12 years of my 22 years at a very large accounting firm, Arthur Anderson, and I can tell you that many of those foreign countries, companies that you're talking about are using very deftly the laws. They're working within the laws by deferring the current recognition of income by using very fancy tax consultants, and that's their right. No one should pay any more taxes than the law requires them to pay, and I would hope that that's what we're talking about. To the extent that there is a true evasion of income taxes, there is no question that the IRS should go after those companies, and they should do it swiftly, and they should be penalized a lot, because no one should be getting away with paying their fair share of the taxes, because when that happens, then the burden of government is allocated on the others, fewer people, and that burden then becomes proportionally more for people like you. So I would say to the IRS that if there are examples of gross and egregious evasions and avoidances of income taxes, not by legal means, they should quickly go after those people, make examples of them, impose the highest penalties possible, because we're on a self-assessment system and we want people to pay their taxes, but we need to spread that burden out fairly.
Mandawa, New Jersey. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm calling. I'm the head of a household, and my wife and I act responsibly when we spend our monies. We can't spend monies that we don't have. And I'm reading constantly about Congress and their inability to use common sense. And I wanted to know, I just assume these people are intelligent people, that collectively they know what's going on. They see the problems in America. And why aren't they able to do the right thing? And I'd want to hear what would be the best thing to do right now about fiscal responsibility. And why aren't the Congress people, these men and women who are intelligent people, why are they so inept? Why can't we... well, you know what I'm saying. I just have no faith in what's going on down there in Washington.
Thanks very much.
Yes, you know, you see the big brouhaha about the check bouncing scandal. I mean, bouncing may be the wrong word, but that's the word that the press picked up and got the public all excited. But can you imagine that we have many Congress people who are not able to keep an appropriate balance in their checkbook so that they write a check that exceeds the amount in their checkbook? And if you have so many people doing that with their own accounts, how can they balance a government checkbook of $1.4 trillion? I think that's one of the things that the public has to be concerned about. But it seems to me that congressmen, by and large, I believe, are good people. They mean to do well. There's a lot of pressure here in Washington, and I believe one of the biggest problems that we have is a process that's not working, a process that must change. And I'm hoping that the current focus on Congress is going to be enough to change that process, not only with respect to numbers, but even with respect to the Ethics Committee. In 1988, I was so chagrined about what I saw. I'm not going to name names, but what I saw at that point, I put in a bill to change the Ethics Committee of Congress, and to show that it had bipartisan support, because I talked to a lot of Democrats, I picked a very liberal Democrat, intellectually honest Democrat, Barney Frank from Massachusetts. He agreed with me, and we introduced an Ethics Reform Act in August of 1988, calling for three things: a public review board on top of the Ethics Committee, so that there wasn't this, collegial business of congressmen one day shaking each other's hands as friends on the floor, and the next day judging them and evaluating them when it came to potential or certain scandals. Another thing we called for was an inspector general. Why not? Other government agencies have an IG to do internal auditing, and if we had an inspector general in Congress, you wouldn't have had this bank scandal today and the post office scandal. And then I called for, but even more recently, a chief financial officer. The bill was signed in 1990. We now have chief financial officers in many government agencies. What's wrong with a chief financial officer for the United States Congress when you have so many employees, when you have a bank, or you had a bank, when you have so many financial functions? So I would tell you that we need to change the process, and I'm hoping that the heat that the members feel today is going to be enough to get them to do something for change that's real and not just treating the symptoms. Now, one of the things I think we need, no matter what, is term limitations. Like Graham-Rudman, I think it's an imperfect solution. I hate to see good congressmen go, but it seems to me that we've got to take now a radical solution to deal with the problem, because there's a lack of discipline and it's getting out of hand, and that's one thing that we have to review very seriously.
Hot Springs, Arkansas. Good evening.
Good afternoon, Mr. DioGuardi. I tell you what, I certainly appreciate your comments, and I hope C-SPAN gets you back again. You certainly enlightened me tonight, or today, and I want to thank you for that. I'm a former Republican, and I say that lightly because I am now one of the coordinators for the Perot Committee in this part of the world, and I wonder, with your comments, you're echoing, if I'm not reading you wrong, you're echoing a great deal of Mr. Perot's overall stance about the budget, about spending. And I first want to ask you, are you in any way a supporter of